Welcome to another episode of Teachers for Teachers. And normally I would be here with Dr. Dejana Figueroa, but she got called into the principal's office this afternoon, so we'll have to wait and see what's up with her. I am Dr. Leah, and I am really happy to be here with you. Today we're going to talk about what could happen in education with the gamification of education, with adding music to curriculum. And you will recognize our guests today because they are regulars with us. Tim Griffin is going to walk us through some songwriting exercises that he does with schools, and Ann McMullen. Ann, do you want to introduce yourself first?
Thank you, Leah. Happy to be here with you and Tim, and I'm so excited to learn from Tim today and the things he is doing. So yes, I'm Ann McMullen, and I am an education leadership consultant based in Los Angeles. My education career actually took place outside of Houston, Texas, where I was a teacher for 18 years and then a director of educational technology for another 16 years. And now I work nationally and internationally with superintendents and leaders across the US and internationally around leading change in schools and getting teaching and learning right for today's students. So it's a pleasure to be with you and Tim. Thank you.
And I think you're also an author, Ann, of a book called Lessons in Leadership.
Yes, Life Lessons in Leadership. Thank you for that plug. I appreciate that. Yes, Life Lessons in Leadership, a book with just some basic principles around leadership for all ages, 8 to 88. So.
Oh, nice. And I have a lot of empathy and some experience these days with the book writing exercise, as I am in the process of writing a book with Nolan Bushnell on the gamification of education, which is where that side comes from. And Tim, Tim is an awesome educator as well, who's retired from the classroom. But Tim, why don't you give us a little bit more about your background? I know you from the LA Chamber of Commerce program that we were in, and then through your music, and I am a huge fan of your music.
Well, thank you. I mostly paid my way through college and graduate school a long time ago, playing in a couple of really terrible bands, and then wound up teaching elementary school, all subjects, but eventually specializing in STEM in Los Angeles for about 18 years. And over that time, I started doing more and more music with my students, eventually writing songs about science and math and so on. And when we started getting solid data back that showed the kids really were doing better when they were tested on the subjects that we were doing music about, I thought we were onto something that could be shared. So in 2012, I started a nonprofit called Griffin Ed. Our main offering is an online library of songs, and it's all free, no ads. And we stream songs, we have lyrics, we have detailed notes on the content standards we address in each song. We try to make them good, but the main thing we do make sure they do is they use the vocabulary the kids need. And if a kid hears one of the songs 5 times or more, they're going to test better on it. And it's at griffined.org. But what I'm here to share today, is it okay if I jump into what I'm doing?
Yeah, absolutely. Except I really want to say before you get started that I think I could probably pass those tests, because I certainly have listened to the songs more than 5 times. I have probably listened to
Well, the thing is, if you're going to be stuck in the car with a small child listening to the same albums over and over and over, at least if it's something about the periodic table of the elements, some good will come of it. And I'm sorry you had to hear them so many times. I wouldn't want to do that. But if you're stuck in that situation, you make the best of it, which is kind of like what I'm doing. Speaking of transitions, that's what we've all been doing, is trying to make the best of the situation we're in this year. So one of the things that I enjoy most about my work is when I get to go to schools and I do live shows for the kids, but more importantly, I do songwriting workshops with the kids, where we take a topic that's under current study and we use the same basic writing process we want the kids to be using for any large writing assignment. And then we write a song about it that they can use as a study tool. So I'm going to walk you through the process that we do, because it used to be limited to schools that were within driving distance of where I live. But because of the pandemic, we can't do that anyway. So I got a very generous grant from the Lewis and Harold Price Foundation, which was very kind of them, specifically to develop the writing workshop as an online offering. And so now we do a virtual residency where I meet with small groups of kids And I've already met with the teacher ahead of time to figure out, okay, what's the theme we want to address? And I'll work with one small group each week for a series of weeks. And we wind up with a song that's, it may not be a musical masterpiece, but it'll be something that they can use and share, and it makes them laugh. And so it's now available to any teacher, any place with a good internet connection. It's all free. And we still have room in our schedule for bookings. If somebody wants me to come visit their kids, I will do it. So if you guys are up for it, I'd like to walk you through the process real fast and show you what the kids do.
I would love it. I
Great,
think
thank you.
So are we ready to go? Okay.
added music to
Now,
curriculum.
Leah, I don't know if you have Elliot with you. Is there a way for you to focus the cameras on this one here? I'm still going to be talking through my microphone, so it's going to want to switch back to my face, but I'm not going to get any prettier, so I'd rather have people watching this, if that's okay.
We got it happening right now.
It's happening right now. Perfect.
It is. Yeah.
So I'll give you an example. This was when I was working with a group of middle schoolers. And I should clarify, I recommend this residency normally for grades 2 and above. In the case of online instruction, I think it needs to be 3rd and above, because everybody really is working at least a year below grade level. I'm 52 years old, and I find when I'm working at my desk now, it feels like I'm 51. And it's certainly true for the kids. Anyway, so I was working with a group of middle school kids, and they were studying ancient Egypt. That was the theme the teacher assigned for ancient history. And what the kids wanted to know about was mummies. So we put mummies in the center of the page. And a lot of people have different names for this kind of visual organizer. It can be a thought web or a bubble web or a brain bubble. We all have different terms for it, but it all works the same. You have your big idea in the middle. Then you figure out, okay, let's put some ideas around the outside. So we started off with mummies. How are they made? Well, King Tut was a good example. One of the rules is, if we're going to write about something, let's be as specific as we can. So who's a famous mummy? King Tut. Well, what did they do with him? How did they make a mummy? Well, they scooped out his stomach, his lungs, his liver, and his intestine. They packed the body with natron salts inside the abdomen. These are 8th graders, of course. They really want to get into the yucky parts. They love it.
Yeah,
right?
of course.
So that was the first thing, was introduce who are we talking about, and get the basic idea that they scoop out his organs, pack the space with natron salts, and stick the organs into a series of canopic jars. They always find those jars with the mummies. That's not for their lunch. That's where the liver and the stomach and the stuff goes. So why did they do this? We get to desiccation. You've got to dry a mummy out or it'll rot. Yeah. So what else did they do? They scooped out the brains, and then they put them in they let them sit for about 60 days. And by the way, what I'm writing down here, this is not my research. This is what the kids found out. So my job ideally is not to be their writer for them. They do the bulk of the work. Now, when I'm working with little kids, I may have to do more scaffolding, but this came pretty much 100% from the 8th graders.
And this is exactly what we talk about in terms of effective pedagogy, is not to come in with the answers for the students, but to come in with the questions and let them do the research to find the answers, which they will remember so much better than if we told them.
Right. So
I have a question for you too, though, Tim.
Oh, please.
What happens to the stuff that goes in the jars when they find the mummies?
Oh, we'll get to that. We'll get to
there?
that.
Okay.
But I like that you're thinking ahead.
Okay.
And that's the thing. It's a process, right? So first, you start with a dead guy. You scoop out the main organs, you pack it with natron salts, stick the organs in the canopic jars. What's next? Well, it takes 60 days for desiccation, which is drying it all out. And we try really hard to use the correct vocabulary in context. That's one of the main points of it. Scoop out the brains, because, the brains are all soft and squishy. You don't want them to get all funky, and so on. Then what do they do after it's all dried out? Well, then it goes in a sarcophagus.
That word I knew.
Big word, right? A lot of $5 words. And one thing I find people are always saying you got to put it in child-friendly language. Well, yes, but I find kids also enjoy, as long as they have the context for it, they enjoy using those big $5 words because it's very empowering. To say, well, there's this dead guy in a box. Well, no, it's a dead king, and he's in a sarcophagus.
Perfect.
And where does the sarcophagus go? Well, then the sarcophagus goes inside a really big coffin. And then I'm not going to write it all out because I don't want to make you watch me do this. But so then from there you get a few detailed words about that, and then finally, I've got to straighten out my camera here. Hang on. And then finally, what did they do with the body of King Tut? Did they put him in a pyramid? Anybody? Raise hands.
That I'm guessing.
King Tut did not get a pyramid, which is why we eventually found the tomb of King Tut, because what's wrong with a pyramid? Well, it's like a great big sign that says there's a huge treasure hoard inside. So that's why the Egyptians eventually started putting their dead bodies in the Valley of the Kings. So they put it in a tomb in a secret valley, which is where eventually he was found by explorers. And so as we go, we're identifying, okay, what do we want to know? What's the key vocabulary? Now, I'm not going to make you watch me do the next step because it would take too long, but because this is a total process of about 4 hours. The kids are with me for about half of it. The second 2 hours is mostly me going through their draft of lyrics that they write, cleaning it up and making it scan to a tune. So anyway, we start with the pre-write. Next step is we go to a website called rhymezone.com. It is one of my favorite websites. I would pay a subscription fee and call it money well spent, but it's free. You type in any word you want. It gives you every word in the English language that rhymes with it. And so we scan through the rhyming lists, finding words that will rhyme and also sort of fit the context. So, when you think about, okay, what is a sarcophagus? Well, a sarcophagus is a big fancy box for a mummy to rest in, right? You know what rhymes with rest in? Intestine rhymes with rest in. Isn't that convenient? And so it turns into a word game. Talk about the gamification of education. When it's going right, the kids are laughing about half the time. And as they're writing down these crazy ideas, it gets messy. We got arrows going back and forth. This rhymes with that. This rhymes with that. And so we wind up with a whole lot of cool ideas. The fun part about that is we get to the drafting, and the kids are they're ready to write at that point. What's the toughest thing about getting kids to write? Oh, what do I write about? I don't know what to write about. Yeah. So if you do a good pre-write, and really this is where most of the work is, then the actual drafting pretty much does itself. So we use our rhyming words. We write simple couplets. Then we have a big fight about what tune we're going to make it fit to when we revise it. And the kids, they want to do rap or they want to do whatever. And, it goes to different things. And we wind up choosing a tune, and then they send in their draft of all their lyrics. And the way we're doing it now with the online is they email it to their teacher, and they can just do a photograph of their handwriting, or they can type it or whatever. And then the teacher forwards it to me, and then I do what teachers call sentence lifting, which is where I take their words and I use the tune that they chose, and we wind up with a set of lyrics that we can sing. And we've got several songs up on the website, up on our YouTube channel now, the Griffin Head YouTube channel, and we've got subtitles of the kids' lyrics so that they can sing along with their own work, and they can forward it to their friends. And they can sing their song about mummies or about geometry or whatever it is they wrote about. We finished up our first trial run in the fall. We've got 2 teachers starting up next Monday, and we've got room for a few more. Would you like to hear the song that came out of this one, by the way?
Please. I feel smarter already, so I'm looking forward to hearing it with you.
Well, that's okay. So we kicked around ideas for this, and I wound up choosing the tune for this one. The kids didn't know it yet, but they learned it very quickly, because I thought of a tune. They kept focusing on, just how they scoop out the organs. That's their favorite part.
Of course.
And so what I thought of, hey, there's a song called Whiskey in the Jar, an old Irish folk tune that would scan with a lot of these lyrics just fine with almost no modification. So here's what we got. I'm going to move this microphone a little closer. And of course, when we're doing this live, it's always, the sound balance is always a little tricky, but I'll do the best I can. And we'll have a video of this one up on the website with subtitles fairly soon. We don't have this one up yet, so this is like a preview for the hardcore fans.
The first days to hear this. All right.
So I don't know if you know the song "Whiskey in the Jar," but that's the tune we used. Tutankhamun was a pharaoh of the land along the river, and when he died, his people dried his stomach and his liver. His lungs and his intestine went into the salt of natron, then stored in 4 canopic jars, each with a godly patron. When a pharaoh died, he'd be cut and dried, his body mummified, his organs in a jar. So they put a hook into his nose and gently drew his brains out. Be careful where you put 'em or you'll never get the stains out. They dried him out for 60 days. It was a lot of work. He might once have been a mighty king, but now he's just a jerky. When a pharaoh died, he'd be cut and dried, his body mummified, his organs in a jar. When he was done with desiccation, they removed the salt he'd been in. They wrapped him up in resin and 100 yards of linen. They laid him in a coffin and sarcophagus to rest in, with jars to hold his lungs and liver, stomach and intestine. When a pharaoh died, he'd be cut and dried, his body mummified, his organs in a jar. So they sealed him in a secret tomb with charms and wards and curses. They lay there through 3,000 years and far too many verses. The pyramids were plundered, but the secret tomb was smarter. They might have never found him if it weren't for Howard Carter. When a pharaoh died, he'd be cut and dried, his body mummified, his organs in a jar. And when a pharaoh died, he'd be cut and dried, his body mummified, his organs in a jar.
That was fabulous. And I would hazard a guess that the kids who worked on that 20 years from now will still remember the words to that song.
I expect they will, and I'll tell you a true story. I ran into a guy in a grocery store who I did not recognize because he was a great big hairy Armenian guy who had been in my classroom when he was 8 years old. And he saw me and he looked at me and he realized it was me. And he comes over and he leans over the bananas in the produce section, puts this big finger right in my chest and starts singing a song at me about the water cycle that he had written when he was in my class. So yeah, when we do this and they get to sing it for their friends and everybody's laughing, it really does stick in here forever.
Yeah.
Even if you don't want it to. So we try to do stuff that will help kids remember. I'm lucky to have a nephew living with us who worked for a couple of years in the video studio over at his high school, which is now closed. But he is now my temporary director of videography, and he's making videos with me. And right now we're loading up a new song every week on the Griffin Ed YouTube channel if you want to see them.
That is fabulous. And I saw you had something you wanted to say.
Well, I realized listening to the whole song that, when you said that the kids do so much better on their tests later because of having that makes perfect sense. And I can see them singing their song while they're taking their test, getting through that.
Yeah. I've had anecdotal reports from teachers who tell me they'll watch a kid taking a test and they're sort of sitting there thinking, and then they go,
That's great. Well, when my kids were young, my son got A's in everything, and I don't think he had to crack a book very often to do it. My daughter had to work like crazy to get B's. And with her, I would say, like, let's take a break. So we would take a break and go for a walk. And I would take the notes she was working on and I would make up silly, ridiculous songs for exactly that reason. I didn't have the talent that Tim has, but there were times when she would say to me, begrudgingly, I'm sure, as a teenager, that, oh gosh, I was writing that test and all of a sudden I could hear your crazy song in my head, and it, would remind. She's now a teacher, as you know. So
that's right. But one thing on that is what that tells us, though, is that you don't. Having some musical talent or being able to play instruments, that's all good, but you don't need that stuff for this to be a good memory tool. It's still, the language, the rhythm, our brains are wired that way. And as far as how good you are at music, that I tell my students, I said, that only matters if you expect to get paid to do it, and sometimes not even then. I mean, have you heard Bob Dylan sing?
That's what we call it. Well, I'm a huge Leonard Cohen fan, and it's the same. There are some
exactly right.
Yeah.
So in that case, it isn't about having a beautiful voice; it's about the intensity behind it.
Really, really good point.
Yeah.
I will never think of Mummies and King Tut in the same way again.
And I am so sorry, but
well, it's so helpful, isn't it? Because I went to the King Tut museum or exhibit that they had at LACMA a few years ago, and I don't remember any of the things that I read on those plaques. But I will remember this song. I will remember that the brains were put in a jar and that something happened to preserve them.
Not the brains. It was the lungs and liver, stomach and intestine. The brains were discarded. They didn't figure the brains were important.
Yeah, Leah, you would know that if you were singing the song. You would not.
It's true. And if I had been part of writing it, which I just think it's brilliant, because this is, and Tim, I've been really supportive of all of the music that you've done. And we expose it to every group that we do professional development with, because I think that it is an example of how it doesn't cost a lot of money to innovate. And what I would love for you to share, Tim, is the story of the 5th grade math class and Masterpiece Theater.
Okay, Masterpiece Theater. This was another thing. We tried a lot of things in my classroom over the years, and one of the things that worked and became a weekly routine on Friday afternoon during that last hour of the day when the kids are getting kind of itchy and watching the clock. And so I said, all right, we're going to try something new. It's called Masterpiece Theater. And they looked at me like, okay, what's that? And I said, okay, so here's the deal. You are going to have a show in 30 minutes, and your job is to make a simple play of maybe 2 minutes to illustrate a story about whatever you think the main thing we did this week for math would be. I will judge you based on participation, clarity of the mathematics. Now, if the story happens to be entertaining, like it's funny, all the better, but that's not necessary. Showtime is in 30 minutes. You may begin now. And then I took a sip of my coffee and the panic began. And the first time we did this, it was kind of a disaster. But if you do it repeatedly, the kids pretty quickly figure out how to put together a simple narrative that illustrates the story. And there are 2 things I love about it. Number one is they're actually doing something productive during that last hour of the day on Friday. And number 2, I don't have to spend any time the next Monday reviewing last week's math content, because they got to see 5 stories about it, because it's small groups doing this. And then and they're still talking about the stories that they told and that they saw. My favorite example was when we were doing long division with decimals. And so one of the plays, a group of kids gets up, and one kid is walking around, and the other kids pretend they're driving a van. They found a little box that our Scholastic Book Club came in, and they're pushing it around, and they ram into him, and he goes, ah! Does a great death scene, lies down on the floor, and the kids get out of their van, and they say, oh my God, he's dead. Check his wallet. And they got out and so they get out a wallet and they're going through and they say, "Hey, there's more than $100 here. How are we going to share it between the four of us?" And one of them says, "Long division with decimals." And so they ran to the board, and one kid is doing the algorithm with with the rectangle and everything, and another kid is doing it with the visual method that we were doing with Singapore math, which has kind of since been displaced by some of those weird Common Core diagrams. Meanwhile, the third kid is telling the story of exactly what the kids at the board are doing. The kid on the floor is still dying all over again. The kids are laughing their heads off, but I knew it was working because Monday morning, the kids not only remembered this, they were talking again with each other on their way in the door about the story, and they remembered the exact numbers and exactly how it worked. I never had to explain the algorithm again.
That is wonderful. It is really just such a great way to, it's the argument we're making about gamifying education. If you can hide the education in something enjoyable,
yes,
where they're engaged because they want to be there and they're learning as a result of it. Even the phrase like a lifelong love of learning, it's fine for we adults who, we want to read, we want to expand, but for kids, it's not about instilling that just love of learning. It's putting something in front of them that is engaging enough that the learning just happens. And then as they're adults, learning is something that they want to continue. Whereas I feel like we're making that K-8 experience for many kids a painful experience. A lot of sitting still, a lot of listening to an adult tell you stuff. And if we can get them engaged in it like this, I really enjoy your program, Tim. Both the
thank you so much
songwriting and the Masterpiece Theater. I tell that often as well. And you'll remember I was lucky enough one day when we had a group of teachers doing a professional development with us, where you came to the warehouse and you told them the story of Masterpiece Theater. And I watched the difference. Like when I tell them, it's a third party telling a story, they're politely listening. But when Tim told it and he had his guitar there and he talked them through, this was educator to educator, best practices, don't need a lot of money, and you don't need to be a musician. I really appreciate you emphasizing that, because I can't carry a tune. I'm not a singer. I don't play a single instrument. But I knew that the music, I learned that from Sesame Street, right? That the music could help them remember. And so it got my daughter.
And none of us are going to be good at everything. I'm good with music, but I can't act my way out of a paper bag. And that's why at any school, you're going to have different teachers who are sort of, if there's going to be a dance of some kind, they know which teacher to go to, right? I was the music guy at my school. And so whether we're in a classroom or on doing it all online now, it's great to find colleagues who are good at things that you're not, and ask them to share. And that's basically what my job is now, is sharing the educational music through griffined.org.
Tim, I just want to say I'm thrilled that you have figured out a way in this whole remote learning environment world that we're in now to do that, because there's a lot of concern about screen time with kids and all this kind of stuff, but you found a way to make it active, to make it engaging, and as we've seen, to then remember so much more. So I've always said the challenge with school is that the teachers are doing too much of the doing and the students need to be doing the doing. And you have figured that out, and to figure it out not only when we can be face-to-face instruction, but also in remote instruction, is such a gift for educators, students alike. So thank you.
Thank you. It's been a huge privilege, and I've had a lot of wonderful help on the way, including the people I'm looking at right now.
Well, thank you. And anybody who needs to find access to Tim, you just need to reach out to us at 2-Bit Circus, and we'll make sure that you're put in touch. But
right on.
Thank you. The half hour is gone already. I so appreciate both of you, Tim, and thanks so much. And everybody at home, thank you for tuning in. And we will see you next week for another live episode of Teachers for Teachers. And Dr. DeJohn will be back.
Great. Thank you both.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.